Three things to like with the VANS UltraRange 2.0 is number one, they have made this shoe wider. After many videos and comments, it seems like Vans might have been listening to us and they have made this shoe a little bit more wide foot friendly. There's less of an aggressive taper up here in the forefoot, and the midfoot tends to be a little bit wider as well and wider fitting with this upper. And the upper volume, I think, is a little bit more accommodating than the original EXO, the rapid weld model, and the original models of the UltraRange shoe. So that is a nice change. If you have a wider foot, this model should work for you. I have an E to double E with foot, and I feel plenty fine in the shoe for the most part. Hold on that. The second thing to like with this shoe is I really like that they reworked the upper construction. And now I like this from a durability and a performance context. So what I mean by that is in the EXO, for example, I love that shoe, but they had the TPU over the forefoot, and what ended up happening at times is it ended up creasing and breaking here at that forefoot toe break, where that TPU met that mesh. It could also hold a lot of dirt and whatnot, so it wasn't my favorite feature with that shoe, so I really appreciate that they reworked this with the suede overlay. The TPU and the mesh feels a little bit more seamless, and they brought that suede overlay essentially to the midfoot here, so you don't have that issue nearly as much. Plus, you do have a bit more of a structured upper, so if you found the EXO, for example, to be a little bit too light, or the rapid weld to be too light for training and whatnot, this upper I think does a good job at locking your foot down. Now it does run a little bit hotter, and I'll talk about that in a second too, but for the most part I've really enjoyed the upper changes used in the shoe. The third thing to like with this model is that they reworked the outsole construction. So in the EXO, you had a lot more space between the lugs on the shoe, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing per se, but if you're wearing them all day, every day, especially out and about in the city that could be a little more dirty or in dirtier or wet climates, that can be problematic for midsole breakdown. This model is a little bit more rigid and built out with the lugs on its outsole, so I think it should last longer. The grip is awesome, I think, in gym and for outdoor usage, so I don't think you'll have any slip issues there. So I do think that's a positive change overall for the shoe, even though it does add a bit more bulk to this model. But now let's talk about a few cons that I have with the UltraRange 2.0. All right, so three cons that I have with the UltraRange 2.0 is that, number one, the tongue can just run awkwardly short if you use the top 7th eyelet here. So I traditionally only use the bottom 6. I like a little bit more tongue, and I don't feel like I need that top eyelet for security. But if you are somebody that likes that 7th eyelet, then that pretty much puts the tongue completely covered under laces. And it's just kind of like an awkward fit at times, especially I think if you have a higher instep or a larger arch, you will likely notice this a little bit more. They did add padding to the tongue, which I do think is a nice change. But I feel like if they just had elongated the tongue like even a centimeter, we'd be cooking with gas regarding just giving it a better fit and security overall. The second con that I have with this shoe is, while I really appreciate that they made it wider, I almost find the shoe to be a little bit bulky now at certain times. And now what I mean by that is, I wish they would have widened the shoe, but not made the platform necessarily this wide, just because when you are getting a little bit more into the sticks of doing more explosive training in the gym or more cross-training focused stuff, this model can feel a bit heavy at times, but I do recognize that that's more of a personal preference thing there, and my head's not so far up my bias to not recognize that I do like more slender shoes for cross-training style stuff. And so all that to say, not necessarily a bad thing, but this model can feel a bit boat-like, a bit big at times. So if they had made that toe box and the midfoot a bit wider while keeping the platform, I think, a little bit more slender, I think that would have made this shoe a lot more versatile in the gym. The third con that I have with this model is, while I love the upper changes, it just isn't as breathable as the original rapid weld, the EXO, the OG models that are a little bit lighter with their construction. That comes at the trade-off of that mesh. Maybe they will roll out an UltraRange 2.0 with a lighter upper construction, but with this mesh and these suede overlays and then also this little TPU overlay, you don't have as much breathability, and that just comes at that cost of you get more durability, you get better security, but you will not have as much breathability. And then also, just to kind of add to that, the forefoot volume in this model is decent, but it still can feel a bit snug at times, especially for all day wear. And so that said, you want to keep that in mind and at least give the shoe, I would say, a week to a week and a half to break them in, because this upper is going to take a bit of time to get working to really get a bit more stretch to it. All right, to break down the performance of the UltraRange 2.0, I'll discuss how they do for lifting, cross-training, short runs, and daily wear. So in the context of lifting, the shoe performs similar to the EXO in that you can use this shoe for a wide range of needs in the gym, and it should do a decent job. Now, what I will say is that if you're pushing weights over 450 pounds, you will likely start to notice this midsole start to compress. We have a fairly high stack height. We also have a 7mm drop, so you are going to be a little bit more heely in this shoe compared to a flatter shoe. So for things like deadlifts and for RDLs, you may notice that if you're used to training with a lower drop or a zero drop shoe. But with this model, you can use them for free weight exercises and machines without any issues, in the sense that this outsole is going to give you grip. The midsole will be stable enough, I think, for most folks. And with that wider platform, it does add to the balance and stability of the shoe as well. But you still will want to recognize that there will likely be a cutoff for some folks with the midsole and how it's going to compress, especially for my folks out there who are moving some serious weight. For cross training, the shoe does a good job overall, but it does have some caveats. So in the sense of where it performs well, one, the grip is great. If you're training on turf, if you're training dynamically on rubber gym floors, this model should do a good job. You also get a good amount of upper security in the shoe as well, so it locks that foot down when you're moving explosively and whatnot. And the ultralight cush midsole feels really good too, regarding giving you a nice level of responsiveness and pop. Now, my knocks against this shoe for cross training is that if you're like me and if you like a more slender feeling shoe or a shoe that's a bit more sock-like, that's where this shoe will start to fall short. It can start to feel heavy. It is heavier than the EXO by a couple of ounces, and it does have that kind of bulkier feel, so you'll definitely want to keep that in mind if that's something you're after with your shoes for cross training. For short runs, this shoe can work for short intervals, and I would say distances between like 1, 2, maybe 3 miles. I find them to be comfortable for my interval workouts, and I wouldn't necessarily use them for longer runs, but I think you can get away with using them for some short stuff if you just want this shoe for the gym, and then maybe like a casual mile pre or post workout. For daily wear, this model has done a really good job. Now, I like this shoe when it comes to its overall comfort for daily wear. I like it for its ability to have a decent fit if you want to wear them looser, and I like them for the tread and the durability of the outsole. Now, my issue with this model for daily wear, and this is something that I would say keep in mind, is that with this forefoot having these layers, I still kind of find it to be a little bit limiting at times just regarding this lateral suede overlay. And so while I appreciate the width, and it doesn't necessarily bother me from a straight up width context, I do notice that upper a bit, and I just think that's because of the layering. And even after multiple workouts and days of wear, I still do notice that at the end of the day. But granted, like now it's gotten to the point where I don't notice it until I'm like 8 to 10 hours of wearing this shoe. So I would say for the most part, for a daily driver, this can be a really good option, especially once they break in. So if you want that shoe for rocking out and about, or you work a retail job, or for travel, this can be a great option to explore. All right, so now who should buy the VANS UltraRange 2.0? Number one, I think if you found the original model to feel just too snug, too narrow, too limiting in the midfoot, the UltraRange 2.0 could be worth a try. I would say go true to size for most folks. You want to size up a half size if you're 3E, 4E width. I'll talk about that in my sizing and fit. But for the most part, I would say give the shoe a try if you just found the original too narrow, but you still like the shoe line. The second context where I think the shoe makes a lot of sense is if you're like me and you like more street style stuff, but you also like to wear a single shoe to the gym and then also out and about for daily wear, whether that's to work or to just go run errands, this can be a great option to go with. It's very versatile, it feels comfortable on the foot, and it's a good shoe to, I think, just leave on all day for the most part once they break in. The third context where I think this shoe makes a lot of sense is if you are somebody who does want a wider platform shoe and you like a shoe that has a bit more bulk and a bit more feel to it regarding its overall platform and the stability that that can create for some feet, this can be a really good option to look into as well. The taper is not that aggressive through the forefoot and the midfoot here, so I think it can be a decent option too for flatter feet. Now, who shouldn't buy this shoe? Number one, if you are somebody who is training super heavy, or if you want a shoe for a lot of dynamic workouts, you may want to find something that's a bit more dialed for those contexts. This shoe's midsole, again, will have some compression issues once you get heavy enough, and they can feel a bit bulky for cross training. Another context where I think this shoe can fall short is if you have a super high instep, girthy foot, whether that's through the forefoot or midfoot, you may want to tread lightly with this shoe too. Just with the short tongue issue and the upper up here still feeling a bit limiting at times, you may find issues with this model still. So I would just say if you do want to invest in that shoe and you fall into that camp, just keep them clean to make sure you can return them if you need to. The third context where I think the shoe can fall a bit short is I honestly liked the breathability better on the original model, and so if you live in a super hot climate, and if you were a die-hard fan of the breathability of the mesh used in, for example, like the Rapid Weld or some of the other models where they had much lighter materials, that would be something to consider with the shoe. There's a lot of suede on this model, so it is going to run heavier, it's going to breathe less, but that is one of those things that I think we have to give it away a little bit to get more durability out of this shoe. All right, so when it comes to the sizing and fit of the UltraRange 2.0, it has been made wider through the forefoot and midfoot compared to the EXO. If you haven't seen my video comparing these two shoes and their fits, highly recommend checking that out. It's going to be linked up there. But all that to say, narrow, medium, and wider feet should be safe going true to size in the shoe. Again, I buy a size US 10 in all the models I review. I have a normal instep and arch, and I also have an E to double E with foot, and this feels pretty dang true on me. I have enough room up here in the forefoot, and it is wide enough for the most part for my forefoot. Now, that said, if you have a 3E or 4E with foot, you may want to go up a half size in the shoe, and keep in mind that this still may be a little bit too narrow for you, so tread lightly there and keep them clean if you need to return them. For flatter feet, you should be okay in this model as well. There isn't as aggressive a taper here. Now, what I would say is that if you have custom orthotics, or if you have a very high instep, arched, girthy foot, and you often have issues with low profile uppers and shoes, you may want to keep that in mind with this model with the short tongue and the overlays in the forefoot. Plus, the insole in this shoe isn't removable, so that is going to limit you a little bit. Yes, you can take it out because it's held in with adhesive, but you always do run the risk of a little bit quicker breakdown in that context, especially if you can't get that to lay as flush, or if your insole doesn't sit flush with the shoe. So true to size should be the safe call for most individuals in the UltraRange 2.0. All right, so when it comes to the weight heel toe drop and insole in the VANS UltraRange 2.0, in my size 10 model here, we have a weight of 11.80 ounces. The heel to toe drop of this shoe sits at 7 millimeters, so yes, you do not have a zero drop in this model. It definitely has a bit of a heel, and the insole in this shoe is not removable. Once again, you can take it out. It is held in with an adhesive, but do keep in mind that if you do that, it might not sit as flush ever again in the model or stay as secure. So definitely tread lightly if you plan to do that. All right, so now looking at the construction of the UltraRange 2.0, up here on the forefoot, you have this rubber overlay. This is consistent with the original model. It has not changed whatsoever. And then looking at the midsole, you also have that Ultra Cush light midsole that runs throughout the entirety of the shoe as well. This has also remained relatively unchanged from the OG model. The only difference I would say is the texture of the midsole. It doesn't have that gritty texture like the OG shoe did in the UltraRange line. Looking at the forefoot, you have 3 layers of materials that cover the forefoot up here. You have suede, TPU, and then mesh. And then that transitions into a mesh and suede overlay upper with some TPU layers throughout into the heel back here. The heel does have a reworked boot, so there is a bit more structure to this boot, which I think could be a good thing for giving you additional lockdown, especially when training. And then looking at the midfoot of the shoe, you have suede overlays performing as the eyelets, and then you have 6 core eyelets that go up with a 7th back here. I don't personally use that 7th eyelet. I look at it like more of as a lace lock eyelet, but if you are somebody who needs to use it, keep in mind that that is going to shorten the tongue for you. The tongue itself is gusseted. It is a padded mesh material. And then once again, the insole in this shoe is not removable. Looking at the outsole of the shoe, you have this diamond tread that runs throughout. You have less space up here in the forefoot and the heel regarding breakage. And then you also have a break here in the midfoot to give this a little bit more maneuverability, which I think is a good thing because this outsole is a little bit thicker than the OG. It's a bit more rigid and built out. But all that to say, if you have additional questions on the construction of this shoe, drop them down below. All right, guys, now would I buy the VANS UltraRange 2.0 again? I would. So for the most part, this shoe has been awesome and it's been very consistent with the first model. I also like that they widen the fit of the shoe. I feel like for a shoe line, this is one of those models that was a nice leap forward and then a half step back with just some nitpicks and weird construction updates along the way. But for the most part, this shoe has been improved overall, especially for capturing a wider foot anatomy that I think will find the shoe to be pretty dang comfortable. If you have additional questions on this model, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, drop subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next one.